guess the fortune teller's right. I should have seen just what was there and not some holy light.
Do you think President Obama's vision of America fits in with identity politics in Canada?
Yes. The Canadian academic media complex from the very beginning, Cadence, going back to 2008, rightly sensed and admired in Barack Obama his potential for moving aside a constitution guaranteeing equality and liberty in favor of policies that promote politically correct identity politics, something which is distinctly anti-American and therefore of great appeal for Canada's anti-American progressives.
Yes, I think the Republican nominee is unfit to serve as president. I said so last week.
What do you make of Donald Trump wanting to make America great again?
Well, in conjunction with the speech he gave in Detroit, I take from that Trump wants to reverse the overregulation of the Obama administration, in addition to reversing those executive actions the president took, which may have been unlawful, such as his skirting the treaty clause and congressional oversight in order to forge a deal with Iran.
But what do you make of this idea that Trump is a second Hitler, the new savior emerging from the right?
There's a couple problems with that parallel, Cadence, but first, let me admit, Trump's message about Mexicans and Obama's open border could have been said better. At face value, this message was easily spun by the Progressive Front as proof of Trump's racism, a spin that was very effective for those able to make conclusions on the basis of sound bites alone, rather than careful thinking that takes into account Trump's hiring policies, in which one finds no trace of the racial theory which held National Socialism together in a collective community of politically correct, racially pure Aryans known as the Volksgemeinschaft. But other Americans understood the point Donald was making, that the criminal element of any nation, society, or culture will always exploit an open border.
Yes, but why do you use the term politically correct in reference to National Socialism, given that today's politically correct social justice warriors are clearly opposed to anyone they deem to be racist?
Because in any society which requires its citizens to be politically desirable or politically correct, it is inevitably the state and a powerful central government that defines political correctness, as was the case in Hitler's Germany, and as will be the case in politically correct North America.
Yet, the politically correct of North America are still portraying their enemy Trump as a second Hitler.
Of course they are, Cadence. This is the tactic of the campus revolution. Call your opponent a hateful bigot in order to exclude him from or limit him within the political arena. But as for calling Trump Hitler, first of all, unlike Adolf Hitler, the brains behind National Socialist philosophy, Trump is not intensely ideological. And while Trump represents America's best hope against the Progressive Front, if only because he does not bow down to the standard tactics of intimidation of political correctness, Trump is hardly a dyed-in-the-wool Republican, and likely to be, as president, more flexible than ideologically intractable. And by the way, not every politician promising to build roads and bridges is a Nazi. Secondly, in terms of his political philosophy regarding the nation state, Donald has said, "We must have law and order," his words exactly. Those who see in that phrase the jackboot heel of Hitler's SS fail to understand Hitler's Germany was not a nation of law and order, but a nation organized on the principle of Ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer. In 1933, the Enabling Act gave this Führer, Adolf Hitler, the power to make his own laws without the Reichstag, then the Weimar Republic's version of Canadian Parliament or the U.S. Congress. And from that moment on, Germany was ruled not by a rational framework of law, but by the beliefs, feelings, and personal agenda of its leader. This was not law and order, it was Adolf Hitler and order, the leadership principle at work, where both the rationale and apparent legal framework of a nation rests not on custom, not on tradition, not on belief in a creator and universal truth, but entirely on the executive decisions of the leader himself, unrestrained by any traditional constitution.
Can you give us one example of how the leadership principle replaces the rule of rational law?
Yes, Cadence, I can give an example of the leadership principle at work. In the early 1940s, when it came to implementing even more anti-Jewish measures in Greater Germany, Heydrich and Goebbels did not need to appeal to a Reichstag or German parliament to write new law. They just made an appointment to see Hitler, whose decisions as leader of the Reich were final and enacted as if they were law. And here is another thing distinguishing Trump from Adolf Hitler. Totalitarian states tend to discredit or weaken regional powers, such as local police, because they are a rival to the state's powerful central government, in this case, the ultimate leader of the Nazi Party. Donald Trump, on the other hand, wants to empower America's local police forces.
But how could a nation like America ever become ruled, not by its constitution, but by this so-called leadership principle?
By having its democratic processes undermined by the tactics of political agitation, which, as carried out by the brown shirts in the early 1930s, helped the National Socialists come to power as a minority government in 1932. Hitler came to power in a democracy, the Weimar Republic, and in those districts of Germany where the brown shirts were able to disrupt free speech, shut down their opponents' speeches, and intimidate citizens, the Nazi Party scored its highest numbers of votes.
But Marilyn Katz, praising the Progressive Front for shutting down Trump in Chicago, writes that most modern scholars would dispute that resistance, by which I assume she means the brown shirts, brought Hitler to power, saying instead that it was the lack of Jewish protest, both in Germany and in America, that allowed Hitler to rise in Germany.
Marilyn Katz is uncomfortable with parallels between Chicago and 1932 Germany, and so she tries to dismiss the brown shirts as a catalyst in the rise of Hitler, lamenting the absence of Jewish protest. But the extent to which the planned murder of European Jewry gradually comes into focus in the 1930s as Hitler's power and transparency grows is directly proportional to the extent to which Jewish protest against it would have been suicidal. And back in 1932, Hitler's anti-Jewish rhetoric fits in with commonplace European attitudes. This is due to a complex wave of anti-Semitism affecting most of Eastern Europe, Russia, Germany, even England and France since the 1800s. Not unlike how anti-Israel sentiment today can be found on most of the campuses in North America. Katz also tries to dress up the action in Chicago as free speech, and I quote, "Actually, I believe the Trump rally and the demonstrations were examples of free speech and free assembly at its fullest and best. Trump can say what he has to say, and so can we." Sure, the protesters had catchy slogans and may have given impromptu or planned speeches, but Trump was not able to say what he had to say. He shut the rally down because aggressive agitation gave him cause to be concerned for the public safety. And let's not forget the title of the Katz article, which praises the Chicago activists not for making speeches, but for shutting Trump down. Disruption of reason.
The thing that we have to watch is making sure there's a double blind between the actual campaign and the actual DNC and what we're doing. There's a double blind there.
And how
So that they can plausibly deny that they knew anything about it. We have to have people prepared to go wherever these events are, which means we have to have a central kind of agitator training.
Yep.
Now, we have a built-in group of people in New York who do this.
Okay.
We have a built-in group of people in DC who do
I was
this.
going to say, are they localized?
We have a group of people in Vegas. We have a group of people in Colorado. We have a group of people in Minneapolis.
Political disruption.
Looking at the writings and speeches of the Progressive Front as a whole, what do you make of their effort to vilify Trump's words and speeches as violence, and yet on the other hand, reinvent political disruption and agitation as an act of free speech?
All of this chaos that you're seeing centers around the Donald Trump rally. After the rally let out, protesters became very violent. They threw rocks and bottles at officers, knocked things over, carried barricades, and even went toe-to-toe with some officers in riot gear. Police primarily used smoke to disperse crowds throughout.
It is cadence, the disruption of reason. Long a reality in Canada, where in 2010, student protesters answered the presence of Ann Coulter on their campus with a level of agitation that caused Ottawa police to actually fear for Coulter's physical safety and to advise her she cancel her speech. The small amount of media attention this stunning emergence of mob rule in Canada received tended to shift blame onto Coulter, while students at Ottawa University celebrated their great victory as practitioners of tolerance and diversity. Marilyn Katz praises the Chicago agitators as a diverse society as follows, and I quote, "No left-wing conspiracy was needed to galvanize students and groups of activists throughout Chicago. It was a natural response of those vilified to stand up for themselves, and of students who live in a diverse society to protest the use of their campus by a bigot." I agree with Katz. This was neither left-wing nor was a conspiracy. It was transparently planned and organized by the Progressive Front in America, including the campus revolutionaries themselves, Black Lives Matter, the Fearless Undocumented Alliance, and MoveOn.org.